Okay, guess we're live today, and right on. Welcome. This is a slow process. I might be discussing a few odd things. The world of data seems to be a slight bit warring against me, meaning it seems like if you find yourself as the center of the world, then there's certain data sets. I mean, everybody sees the world at their eyes, but then the idea that they're reflecting back at the world as if they are the central, they're the VIP of the world, not merely their own lives, but of the whole world, right? That the world is an echo off of their being. Then how it is they comport themselves to the world insists that they find an echo of their existence within what they perceive as the world. And kind of having a basic ambivalent grip on this idea is a type of foundation to empowering oneself. It's so interesting, the things that I didn't care about. By the way, I'm starting to layer oil on top of acrylic, and there's comment. If you go to the comment section on YouTube, let me add that here also. You can enter if you would like. So feel free. There was, for me, recently a crucible of contradiction. I had written a book on contradiction, and then as that goes out, then it echoes back. The echo of the wave, so to speak, that I created comes back and manifests itself, and it functions as a tool, and I believe it's a witching tool, for all of your Harry Potter beliefs or non-beliefs. And anyway, so what to say? I just got out of a lovely chat with some guys from England, some guys from America, and a guy from Thailand, a Buddhist, who was speaking about his relationship to knowledge as not as a quest for truth, but as an attempt to find that which is least wrong, right? And he then gave anecdotes of his history's relationship with knowledge, and how he came to understand not the Westerners' drive to have some sort of epistemological framework in which to migrate their being towards a truth, but it was more of an orientation on how to approach life more basically materialistically through one's day-to-day practices, such that one is doing the lesser of wrongness as it applies to, I guess, their lives or their perception of the world. So it was kind of a Buddhist middle path approach, and it seemed as if my job was, as a functioning diplomat early on, it was trying to break the distinction between an American person speaking about logic and subsets with one of these modern Christian type that they're not JW, Jehovah's Witnesses in the singularity, but they have this isomorphism or one-to-one relationship that they grant attributes or essences of God, and one of those essences is logic, right? And then, so the logicist was arguing, saying that that man's relationship to, well, not man's relationship to logic, that's kind of where I had to come in, but speaking about the histories of logic and the histories of literacy and such, but initially he was just trying to say, like, because the person that was making isomorphic logic with God was saying they're both transcendental. Well, the other guy said, well, by virtue of being transcendental, that means one of them is beyond the other one, where I had to come in and kind of explain that because he wasn't articulating it. But like, look, either God is a subset of logic or logic is a subset of God, and meaning by virtue of the use of the word transcendental. And then, she, being the isomorphic one-to-one God, God's essence is of logic, seemed to, I don't mind that as a faithful argument if it's registered as a faithful argument, but it's been touted through the Discord channels as a truism of God, that God is logical, that God is towards truth, and I've always had an issue about that, because that's like to me, it's a have your cake and eat it too, a chicken or the egg argument. It's not evidenced within the semantics of the theological Abrahamic texts. Somebody once said the phrase "I am that I am" was a statement of logical identity, and then I had to have arguments in terms of, like, well, is it necessarily that case? In Revelations, there's some argument also, the beast that was, that isn't, and yet is, or something to that effect. Kind of like, okay, anyway, so I had to entertain this distinguishment between these two people and talk about set theory as Russell and Cantor, Russell and Frege. Frege put together the function aspect of maintaining, like, the function of X, making a static statement of X such that the remainder of the mathematical proposition could be at play. And of course, Russell retorts, because of Russell's paradox, which was discovered essentially like right prior or during contemporaneously with Frege, that look, you can't use X as a statement. You can't hold it statically and then apply it as an element within its own set. It can't both be a definition of the set and an element within its own set, right? But that's precisely how modern mathematics is required. It's required to have one exceptional state or a referent of a variable as a static position, such that it can then play out in the remainder of the mathematics. And this is yielded in logical notation. If you look at the backwards E with the explanation point, like an exact variable, a universal variable, and like an exact specific variable. It's that exact specific variable that allows one to find one contradictory exception such that to apply math can be applied, right? And so anyway, but then I didn't really go into depth that way with those two interlocutors. I was merely arguing that they that the lady was making kind of like what I believe she was doing initially was she was taking the tripart aspect of modern logic of the three logical laws and saying that they're isomorphic to the triunion aspect of the Orthodox Christian notion of a triunion Godhead, hence making Christianity necessarily true and other religions like Islam false, because Islam wasn't ever breaking the essence of God away from the demands of God, meaning just the statements of God, something like that. So she was somehow using the laws of logic and what I thought was a triunion argument, tripart argument to justify her opinion. And there's a few of these people being trafficked through these rooms lately that are trying to use an attribute of God as transcendent and saying that logic is necessarily transcendent, which overlooks the history of semantics. Semantics or the language use, the history of the meta, meaning where language arcs like this wave back upon itself. It's describing itself. It's where language becomes recursive. It's where its application, its referent is itself. And how the grapheme, the history of written or the history of literacy, and or even the priestly classes that were both literate and then and vocal. I mean, the grapheme and the phoneme were present with the priestly class, but the ignorant classes, there was not a presence of that. And so there was still a history of logic that was mostly the history of human reason is not the same thing as the history of modern logic. And so I was trying to fetter out to both of them why I disagreed with both of them. And then the Buddhist guy came in and he started talking about finding not truth but truth per se, but that he's trying to find that which is less false. And then I tried to figure out how that was applicable to him and saying, well, in the Western tradition, epistemology, his argument kind of came down to, an anecdote about, well, look, if a bird eats a worm, the bird is not wrong from the bird's point of view, but from the worm's point of view, the bird is definitely wrong when one is questing for truth. And then they remade the allegory with a human and a lion. Well, if a lion eats you, the lion isn't wrong, right? Even though our legal aspects in the West say, well, if an animal kills a human, it's our right to justify to go out to kill that animal, right? But his point was more like, from what I had to describe as a phenomenological domain. The phenomenological aspect is different than the epistemological or the ontological aspects of philosophy. And so, him being a non-English speaker, I was trying to shore up those three different domains as to suggest that his argument was stemming from a phenomenological or first-person experiential notion of right and wrong, when the modern Western mind, post-Kantian mind, emphasizes more of the epistemological domain, such that one is bearing out a notion of objective truth necessarily as the case. And so then we had someone from England that was trying to press him on bringing a type of truth and speaking about him being presuppositional. The presuppositionalist in his thinking, but from my vantage point, it wasn't so much that the Buddhist, was being presuppositionalist as much as he was merely alternating or exercising, the term exercise, to exercise his knowledges. And I said it was more like it wasn't the directional flow of Western propositional logic analysis. that he was more in an ebb and flow of consideration. And the Buddhist guy didn't particularly agree nor disagree with that statement, but he reiterated his position as more like, hey, nobody is wrong, right? I'm just gathering sets of human, like he didn't say this way, this is kind of my phrasing, but he was just kind of collecting voices. So he says, like, even if I disagree with people, they're informing me. And that's a huge pronouncement, kind of a tie, I think, Jeff Smith Ludke, as he'll call that, like acceptaism or acceptivism, which I think is interesting, right? You just take in what it is that's presented, but I think Az had a different take on it than how it is I'm surmising it. But anyway, and then it's been brought out in different ways, right? But then the idea of the Zen oneness, or the oneness of God, back to the Christian isomorphic lady that was trying to make logic an attribute of God, who seemed to overlook the histories of logic. She was peculiar in, or is I going to take that thread? It didn't know. I kind of just mentally hijacked myself right then. Anyway, yeah, because I was circling back. How was I circling back? It's weird. It's weird trying to apply oil to acrylic right now, and it's weird also that I'm letting my mind attempt to paint instead of thinking about the painting process itself. I'm allowing this disjunctive topic to kind of allow my mind to not focus on the pain, just kind of let the hand do more of a reactionary thing, like as a sub-relationship to the eye. And sometimes it's good because when you're in the flow, or what someone else, my old high school teacher references the flow of art in a type of silence, he found this flow. And it was, I don't know, to him it was like a separation state that he wanted his students to get into so that they could focus more easily on the painting process. But it is also weird for me to like start speaking like, okay, well, right now what it is I'm doing is I'm laying down a kind of a purple undertone, but I need to make certain the heat of the purple is more on the red spectrum, because it's got a contrast with the blues and the coldness of the waves, and the human shade, warm human shade infers cold exterior light. And so the light and the atmosphere is more of a cold domain, so the shade then falls into the warm domain. And so then I need to move. So, yeah, and it is good for me to, I guess, oscillate topics back to the painting so I can self-correct. There is another dimension to my phenomenological, my experiential being right now, which is, Barkler, I don't know how to participate in this topic, but best not to interrupt your exploration. No, dude, if you want to jump in, that's fine. I was just trying to say that, I'm just, because it's almost a free flow, as long as I can maintain kind of a focus. I knew I would have to focus on articulating what it is I'm doing about the painting to myself, whether internally or in this. But the last aspect, or not the last, but another dimension, there's a couple kind of compounding dimensions going on relative to my body now. And one of the compounding dimensions is my pain levels. Right, so I'm trying not to move at the feet. I'm moving only kind of at the hip and trying to stay basically stationary, because, it's a fight. Now, the reason the pain levels are an issue, I normally mention those. And that, who knows who is an artist that's suffered great, physical pain or something like that, or maintains it. I don't know, and maybe that's meditation, has nothing to do with that. But the other dimension that's messing with me is a legal dimension, right? So now there's a legal dimension that I've fallen prey to a probationary period of urinalysis for drugs and alcohol. Well, alcohol has been a staple of numbing my body, but I had to eschew and push that away quite a bit because it seemed problematic to me, right? Meaning my pain levels were high, and I was basically swimming, allowing my brain to swim in alcohol for just way too long, and I was reaching this almost like a sense of pious theological pressure that was building up because of this court case within me that had demanded to take kind of the plurality, right? Maybe back to the lady in the Christendom. That's maybe what I was going to bring up, right? She was trying to speak on the plurality, the tripart plurality of God necessitates one of the aspects or attributes of God is to explore his essence. And so essence requires some sort of attribution, and that attribution is fettered out in the personification of either, God the Father, God the Son, or God the Holy Ghost. And then the other two move there, and then someone brought up the East Indian pantheon, which I just took as pantheons in general, whether you want the Odin, Greek, whatever pantheon or multiplicity of gods. And I thought, well, why is the idea of e pluribus unum not applicable to the Christian? Why is it that this particular brand and this particular logic as aspect is preferable as an attempt to illustrate? Like that, basically, the argument is that modern logic proves that Christianity is true. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, random call. Hello. Right on. It's an important message for our card member. Anyway, point is I'm also like violating, meaning I'm teaching warlockism outside of Hogwarts, if you will. And so you don't want to get too heady, but you also, there's not too many people that traffic my site. And so, we'll assume that the Google powers that be will only shore it up to people that are ready to take in whatever it is I'm rambling about. And, what do you got here? Oh, hey, Mark. Oh, Bolt. Oh, there we go. Oh, see, both you guys could both link in and then disjoint this. But anyway, my point is that legally now I'm required to be off of drugs and alcohol for a year, yet it's also colder and my hip is exploding out and the feet are slowly deteriorating. So it would seem from an entropic principle. By the way, my word to my niece, because I give her vocabulary words, was entropy and entropic. And then Anton's phrase from the school of semantics and general semantics and semiotics was negentropy. If you guys remember, he used the term negentropy. And I thought, well, and as I was explaining in text to my niece, trying to be as parsimonious and simple, like, hey, negentropy is basically an antithesis to the second law of thermodynamics, and that it itself is kind of a roundabout, colloquial, or a pocketed, not colloquial, a pocketed term in communication studies to generally just round off that life itself is an organizing principle, right? So if life is an organizing principle, then you would say it's negentropic. And that's all I was trying to impart to her. And anyway, point is it feels like my feet are in a state of entropy, even though the powers that be, the healing of the body, the soul, and the renunciation powers of the spirit of Amatilla will come to heal this man. Heal me. Oh. Who knows, right? Whatever. Anyway, point is, beyond that I need more herbs, is that I was using kratom. Kratom affects one's neurons, like the cannabinoid receptors, in I guess a non-dissimilar way to THC, in that it puts you in an enlightened state. It happens to be legal in Utah, but I am now, and I need to do a little bit more study on this, I am now under the presumption that a UA, a urinalysis test via a probation officer, would probably churn up kratom as a violation of a THC consumption, and then that would fuck the pooch for even that use. And so I don't even know how long that takes to get out of my system, but I've been staying off of that too. So once again, I'm under this other dimension of stress. There's another dimension of stress going on. And, okay. Rev admitted he likes using the defense mechanism known as compartmentalization. I think that is mid-level. Well, and then, so in terms of levels, mid-level, high-level, other levels, you know, it was more like, to me, I kept talking about a meta of the language, or a peering back. A language upon the language is basic, kind of a recursive look. But then a meta upon the language is also like a covalent bond level, where you got the first shell, atomic shell, and then you get the secondary shell of electrons, and then you get even greater and greater shells, and they're all around and about a central point, right? But then you got covalent bonds, where one shell then migrates and starts orbiting around another central point, or multiple central points, and that the shell levels are being shared at different levels as well. But as they go closer to the center, if the molecule is larger, I think the more basic or mid-level shells are sharing less electrons or fewer electrons. And so the meta, though, is that, you know, it's trying to comprehend, to me, the most exterior shell that one can, and then maintain the field of all orbit, or orbiting, you know, the center of all orbitings, right? The central point. And so, and then that increases one's ability to move into what I think are, you know, and back to the discussion with the Buddhist guy, as I was trying to explain to him that his going through a certain tragedy, and how in the West we want to bring the shell up to the highest epistemological domain of what we would call truth, or exterior truth, where he was approaching things phenomenologically through his experience. Because he was talking about being hit in the car, and his first thought was his mom is going to be mad, and I was, you know, trying to explain that I was moved into like a single pane of just symbolism, which was different than kind of a Zen oneness of God, or the Godhead, that kind of commands that when one is reaching their end, that they are responsible for every single attribute, like their Akashic history, their Akashic records history, kind of like a meta-epistemological frame. Anyway, and so I was trying to function, and I think I do pretty well as far as a diplomat, between argumentative styles, or distinctions between what it is I think I'm apprehending of different people. Anyway, so I started painting, and I really just wanted to work on the face, right? It was just more like, God, get the face going. And while I got some energy in me, my brother, he's like coming over, he's trying to get me to call up this guy that's one of these like sovereign citizens, or this guy is placed, what do you call it? Like legal relationships to the U.S. government, your position as an executor, your citizenship status relative to, your treasury status, your certificates of birth or compliance and compliance to signatures and just all these things. And so there's guys that have apparently studied this, and I've listened to some of it and tried to use some sort of creative application within my court case. And ultimately, the court case was a test. I had to separate out the form of the court case from the content of the court case. The content of the court case, I moved it as a agnostic position. Like I fronted exactly a position to the center, to the claimant's position. And it turns out that the court they weren't buying my story, right? They were trying to take on something beyond the evidence. And then I caught the court in a procedural error. And as I was functioning pro se, meaning defending myself, there was a problem that I registered as the court violated its own criminal procedure. And then the judge had induced me, I say induce, heavily enticed me under the notion of a type of threat based on her observation of my ignorance when I was arguing before the court that I would do much better if, in fact, I did have a representative and I did take a defense attorney. So I did sign eventually the affidavit to get a defense attorney, but she also, based on the transcripts and based on my memory, had articulated that it would be in my benefit and that I would still be able to direct the case. And so her transcript saying that, then I found that even my defense attorney didn't know the legal code that I was presenting, and she didn't respond to the court after she wouldn't allow me to file with the court an objection to the court. And so because she didn't do that, I then quote that I wasn't able to guide the case as the judge said that I would, and that now I was actually at an extreme disadvantage by getting counsel instead of remaining pro se. And so then that made the judge look bad, and all of this was based on the fact that there was an issue with the summons, which is a procedural thing, and the judge said, I can give you, as a pro se defendant, no latitude, zero latitude relative to the court. Right? So she'd give me zero latitude. She says any judge in this building would have to, by law, not give you any more latitude or consideration than any other attorney that's present with regards to procedure. And that's in the transcript. So I quote that, and then I throw it back in their face, like, well, if that's the case, then since the summons showed up late, and that's a procedural error, that's a ball drop on the prosecution's end, which means that you, then, Your Honor, are non-impartial, which means that you are, in fact, favoring the state over the defendant, and that you enticed me to get a representative saying I'd be able to guide the case and it would benefit me when it did just the opposite. My defense attorney was incompetent and went over the window of filing. And I present all this back and just shove it back in their face with now the court's in dishonor. I'm self-discharging from the case. But then the problem was this was a form argument, and I prefaced like, okay, the content of the case is still, right? So then here's the echo of my contradiction book coming back to bite me in the ass, right? Like, okay, so there's this ambivalent state. There's some crisis. Let me read up a little bit. I am self-timing out for S. I picked up the terrible habit of using apostrophes incorrectly. Surfer is orange board. Oh, anyway, stabilize on lies. I wonder if Trump can swim. Right. Oh, I even had this notion, like, my hair being blonde, and like, is my court case failed, Trump would be impeached as some sort of like parallel universe, like an I Am Trump autobiography, and if I fail, that'll allow an impeachment of Trump or something like that. But it was also like, because I even used the term witch hunt, like, it's apparent to me that the prosecutor being a woman supplanted by a man, and the judge being a woman, and my defense attorney being a woman, and the claimant being a woman, that that it was easy to see that the prosecution slid in a man such that it wouldn't be obvious that there was a gender bias or hence an inverted witch hunt. Against who? Me, the warlock. Warlock training. Anyway, point being is that the content is what I decided. That's what I had played. There's the old Army gag. Oh, prosecution gag. You charge someone, you charge any entity with at least two things. That way, if it goes to court, the prosecutor has prosecutorial advantage because they want to cut a deal, right? Instead of taking shit to court, costing more time and more energy, they try to cut you a deal on one count, relieved in favor of a guilty plea for another count. So they offered me that, and I said, no, I won't plead guilty. I'll plead no contest, to which they said, no, you must plead guilty. But by pleading guilty, that opens up a civil avenue for the claimant to file a civil suit. And I was like, I don't need, this is already like her claims of the case are so much more absurd than even the state's charges, that the woman kept insisting on this greater claim. And and so my position became radicalized in the face of her. Granted, I didn't have a lot of exposure to where she was until sentencing, but even though I discharged myself legally and informed to the case, and I showed up for sentencing, thinking I might go to jail, I prepared all my place. My cat here now is my old girlfriend's cat, babysitting it. Like, she can't take it with her for the time being, so it's my cat by proxy for the time being. And anyway, so the thing is so I was adding all this cat food and turning off all the heat and getting all the lights, getting all shit in order, even having like my brother was going to show up, and I gave him all these directions. Like, okay, if I'm incarcerated for more than 3 days, you need to send these 2 letters out to the Judicial Board and the Ethics Committee. And if it's more than 10 days, then I need you to send this whole filing out, to the governor's office and something, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out they weren't asking for jail time. But then the fucked up thing was, right, because the whole thing, if you must know, it's a charge for lewdness. We got charged for lewdness. Beyond that, I'm not going to tell you guys anything because everything's still in play. There's a 30-day appeals period and such. But so I end up showing up for sentencing. Both the process, like the clerk of the court, stamped my paperwork, my self-discharge, and I put it in a manuscript form. I am telling a story. Scene 1, Scene 2, Scene 3 of the 3-card money, meaning they're the 3 cards, the prosecutor, the court, and my defense attorney, and that they're in cooperation to beat the mark, me being the mark of the patsy. And so then I illustrate exactly step by step how each one was the prosecutor's in malfeasance in terms of the summons. The court is obfuscating the claim of it. I don't have a chance to object. I move from pro se to getting a defense attorney, and the defense attorney then does not allow the window of time for objection to be inserted, and hence the window of time goes away. And then we move to a preliminary hearing, and at that point, I no longer can bring it up. And so I realize, like, I've been had by the court. I wasn't able to drive the case, and I bring that all back home. But nonetheless, this is a form argument, a procedural structural argument, which the court was simply too proud to drop the case. So anyway, I show up to sentencing. Prosecution's got this manual. My defense attorney's got this manual. She takes me aside. She says, "You just told all of us to fuck off." And I said, "Yeah, I did." And she's like, "Yeah, well, I'm not certain what to do here. Like, are you re-upping? Am I your representation?" Because I also let her go. You're no longer my representative. But I showed up on sentencing thinking, well, look, I'm still ultimately being punished for or charged for the content. And I thought, well, look, my little gag, my little ruse, my little whirl apparently psychologically fucked up, this lady a lot big enough to call the cops on me. And so that being said, I was like, okay, well, look, I was pleading guilty to lewdness as the content. And so I showed up, and then the shit she said or had her attorney say, oh God, it was just so over damning, but I just had to hold still. And then and even my attorney trying to train me on how to take responsibility through a public apology. You know, it was like, oh man, okay, well look, I already had something I was going to say, but I said this. Anyway, the point is that when the judge showed up, my defense attorney said, well, you know, ma'am, the defendant, you know, put in the court this manuscript, basically, you know, saying X, Y, and Z, and the judge said, she says, nothing is before me. Nothing is properly before me. I've seen nothing. Which then would be a functional malfeasance of the clerk, or, once again, another glossing over bullshit from the court so that they can get their man regardless of their own fucking malfeasance. Anyway, so the whole thing was golden, right? Meaning, to me, it was an application of contradiction at play in the court system. And it's still at play within the court system. It's fucking golden. So, so there's that. Plus, it's in manuscript form. So when I change the names to protect the innocent and the guilty or whatever, I can, you know, distribute it as possibly a book. I just wish it was a romance book where it ended with me, you know, finding the one lady. I'm finally gonna, I can get down and bring my crotchety old middle-aged man up to the courthouse to get myself fucking hitched and start knocking out some non-applicable, but which then this other video, you know, very much compiled that when humans are aware of these higher covalent levels of data set, such as to move you through a solipsistic domain and move the individual as kind of a symbolic data set in meaning, that the antinatalist ethic in one way takes over in terms of a trending ethic. They're saying, well, as soon as people are aware beyond a solipsism, beyond the idea of other spirit, they when they get to a certain level of perception based on this scientific study of consciousness, this whole group of people is less likely to have kids than the people that are unaware of this domain, this aspect domain. But it was a different argument than an antinatalist argument, but it was still functionally a more like those who are more aware are less likely, you know, per capita to have children than the people that are aware of this. And so the people that become occupational or granted an occupation, they start moving within the material frame and paradigm of the world. You can even say my relationship to the painting is an attempt towards, you know, granting myself a material representationalism. That itself is still a type of grounding, and maybe that's why I'm ignoring it topically, just trying to let it do its thing, is because I don't know. I mean, it's that whole thing. Like, where's my love story? Where's the whole thing? And then it all comes back to myself, like area, and then in self-analysis and my history and childhood, and then renunciation, and then acceptance, and then not giving a shit, and then justification, and this and that. Anyway, then I was on the so I was on the phone with this guy from California, good old Ace, and we get to talking, and I tell him how. You know, because he knows my whole story, my supernatural stories between the orb and the red star and jumping off the roof in between the two, and how it is I classify things, and how most agnostics remain in an agnostic theological state because they never get confirmation from the universe. But I say, I did get confirmation, so I'm of a different class of people to grant a greater intelligence, not an omni-intelligence, but nonetheless a greater intelligence, a greater power, that is above and beyond, whether it migrates or orbits back into deism or application to ground one's life or whatnot. That's where I'm coming from. And so I get to chatting with this guy about what do you call it? I get to chatting with the guy about I say now look. So one thing I noticed, kind of like Muhammad, right? He has the Quran. And then they have the Hadith, and the Hadith is a buttressing text. It tells you how to interpret the Quran. Like the Book of Mormon has the Doctrine and Covenants, which is like the code of behavior but their gem is the Book of Mormon, right? And so the Doctrine and Covenants is a buttressing text, right? And then you got like the Talmud, and then the history of these other books, the Jewish books that are buttressing texts. They're trying to re-up, kind of add a second meta, second covalent onto the whatever the central thema is, such as our God is the central God. And anyway, the whole point where I'm going with that, let me refocus, was that is that I said, okay, but I said Joseph Smith, for example, he's known to be a con man. But I said, after I saw the orb and something supernatural, it made me think, well, then I'm not going to say that these quote unquote prophetic figures did not have intersections with abductive, sensory apprehensions, not just psychological, coincidental apprehensions of something greater. And that Joseph Smith, he argued, he saw the Son come present itself, and then God and the Son, God the Father and the Son presented himself. And so anyway, so I was telling the guy, I was telling Asa, I said, hey, he said, now the cool thing about truths is that they need a buttressing or a perpendicular falsehood to run tangential with them, right? Meaning, like, for example, and I brought up Gary, I brought up Amendum and antinatalism. I said, now look, if his great truth that he's granting to the world is antinatalism and the suffering argument and everything, if that's grounded as his great prophetic truth that he's trying to purvey in his own manner, then I said his perpendicular false or his lie that he's presenting, his false mask, is his draft science. It's like, so what you're saying what? He's lying about the draft science on purpose? And I said, he's doing both, right? He's letting the draft science in a fashion kind of drag the wave function down to the particulate, bring it down to the material, because it, even though it's very uneducated compared to like Sean Carroll, the other quantum physicists that can break down the math, and they'll default more to the wave function than they will to the reduction of particle, which is you'll hear Gary bark within his draft science, no end to this, right? And so, but I said that's his weak spot, right? So Gary is fronting a weak truth or a mask of truth with the draft science as a perpendicular to run alongside that which is his truth, which is his antinatalism. I said that's the same reason that Joseph Smith is both a truth teller, if you will, like his magnanimous truth is the Book of Mormon, but then he's the con man. He'll live as the con man. He'll do conning things afterward as a type of perpendicular liar, untruth, or weak truth that actually re-ups or emphasizes or buttresses the quote-unquote truth of these matters. So by the same virtue of, like Muhammad being insightful and true of this, like the truth within the knowledge itself should be able to exist. The hadiths will talk about how one is to lie for the truth of God, and what ways one is to act civilly, uncharacteristically or unvirtuously relative to what one might call the truth of God. And so my whole argument was that a lot of truths, a lot of grand truths, are buttressed with grand falsehood, right? And that's why then when I was reading this lady's account of what I was being charged for, I was like, Jesus Christ, this fucking lady really bloviated. Like, she really fucking made up some shit. And a good thing the state isn't trying to fucking over accentuate her argument, because God, that'd fucking kill me. But and they didn't, and they weren't, and it kind of got reduced to what it got reduced to. So there I'm arguing the form right. Or I decide, even though I self-discharged, I needed to show up to court. And that's when I showed up to court, right? And so then that's why my attorney, like, what are you doing? You're telling us to fuck off, and you're here. And the judge is denying she even received the paperwork, but you're going to step in and get the judgment. Yeah, you're going to get the judgment. You're not going to go to jail. You're going to get this probation. it's going to fuck over your body and your pain. And it's like, yeah. Plus, I don't have transportation, so I can't drive. It means I got to walk. And every 100 feet that I walk, the feet are on fucking fire more, and I got to get on a fucking bus and then go do community service. So I'm required to move. I'm required to use transportation because of another fucking case. Let me just do a little side step intermission on this one. The side case, right, was that I had a DUI. Well, in coded law in U.S. Utah code, I already forgot the code number itself to have you guys look it up. But the code number in the other one is Utah code 77-6-4, presentation of summons or presentation of accusation. That was my argument of where the court dropped the ball. But this other court case, which occurred previously, was a DUI court case. And I appealed it twice internally within the driver's license division, and then I took them to court because they even told me that's your next step. You take us to civil court to get a decision. Well, that fucked me over because now I found out this month I don't get my fucking license back. And in fact, I got to wait until March next year. And even though the case was supposed to be cleared because there was no null movement, no one made a motion, and after late October, the case was supposed to be cleared. It still hasn't been cleared. So I go to the driver's license division. They're like, look, you're still slated to not get anything back until the court case is resolved through the court system, even though the criminal aspect of it was, because the new court case violated the probation of the DUI in the criminal court. So I had to go see a judge before then, and good thing the prosecution and my new random defense attorney decided, hey, look, he's done all this other shit. He complied with all this. Let's just drop it. And the judge dropped it with some admonition, some castigation. Like, fucking A. Anyway. So, anyway, the point is that there is, in the first case, I argued. I said, well, look, the officer on the scene gives you a breathalyzer, right? And so this here breathalyzer, look how orange that is. Now I got to go pink. Now I got to knock it back again, by the way. So they're in the same law, subsection, there's a subsection, meaning there's the law, and then there's two subsections. Well, one subsection says something about, like, if a person refuses a chemical test, then they're liable to this particular grand consequence. Well, I denied a secondary test, but a subsection of that law is that if upon application of a chemical test, if the person being tested requests the results, which I did, to and from that officer, the officer has to tell the person what those results are, which he didn't do. And so that was the basis of my civil case. Like, look, I'm violating the one, Section A, he's violating Section B. What the fuck? What the fuck gives, right? He can't violate Section B and then you guys overly fucking punish me, right? But then I was so fucking tired of trying to do court cases because I sued my HOA and that fucking took forever and I got nothing out of it. And then I'm back at some legal thing and then I'm arguing some fucking court thing for my old girlfriends and trying to, like, oh, you should get this line argued from this defense and all this other fucking shit. Anyway, point is, I'm kind of having a hoot rambling about it, but it's not maybe all that interesting. Because in wizard school, part of one thing you have to do is you have to fight the law. Then a good old Angela in here, you fight the law and the law wins. Anyway, so that's my story, and I'm semi-sticking to it. And if any of you followed it, lovely. If you didn't, that's fine as well. And now back to pleasant conversation about the application of a cooler pink on top of the orange, migrating once again away from a heat towards the light aspect. Coming down, should be cooler on the light side, such that the warm shadow is in contrast. Because one of the huge things in painting is that you balance both light and dark, you balance heat and cold. And that's just for the traditional painters. Of course, any yield in the creative domain is accepted now, because these classical principles of painting, although are admired as they echo back people's general aesthetic sensibilities of what is a profound representation from the human hand in Western traditions of representation. People are often, they're lauded for having a greater ability to bring out the specific nuances that people see, but they're not necessarily able to articulate what it is or why it is they're seeing what they're seeing, or why it is they're attracted to the particular aesthetic that's in at play in front of their mind. And so, anyway, then, what to say about good old wizarding school, the warlock and witch school. It's rough racket, talking about people's plays in the world, what holds them up, how it is they want to jive, how it is they're interacting with the world. I mean, in my case, basically put me in a catatonic state of meditation and like, okay, look, I can't go perform anymore. I can't go be outlandish in public. I can't do things that could be considered lewd. And then you have to look at the history of obscenity laws, and the history of lewdness. Utah law and lewdness, subsection D, any other act that is called lewd. And like a tautological law, right? It's like, yeah, geez. And all it fucking takes is someone's accusation, someone's misinterpretation, someone's overinterpretation, and then being able to articulate it all back to court and being daring enough and having the time to do so. And the court system counts on everyone being too damn busy, other than people that have studied law, to go through and be abreast of current law structure and then make an argument. Well, that was one of the benefits of being disabled, is that I had a lot of downtime. And of course, they took these things fairly seriously. And I thought, hey, I got the acumen to at least make the argumentation, And, and then after the fact, I had to agree, like, well, it is arguable that what it is she did perceive caused affront and alarm. And so then I had to acquiesce, like, okay, I agree then. My behavior under that coded law seems to be true. And so I will take the plea guilty plea. And so that's the problem. That's the goddamn problem. And then just trying to own oneself, relative to one's sense of character as they relate to the world. You don't want to violate what you yourself believe is like a formal code, like your own infrastructure of foundation. Like, to lie to oneself, to lie outward is different than to lie inward. If you lie inward, then you'll run into a conflict. And that, I believe, is the beginning of the Islamic greater jihad of coming to allow the contradictory sets to not flesh out, or the notion of their kahita, or kahita, where they get to lie for the benefit of prospering the religion, in lieu of them knowing how to articulate in an argument, or some form of horseshittery that has a greater virtue, the covalent level where the virtue lies is higher than the immediate level. So somehow it's okay to, in Islam, to lie in these particular circumstances. And then I guess that itself is coded within the theological text. And then it's kind of that whole idea of, do you lie to the Germans to protect the Jew, or to protect people from murder and unjust wars, or is it unjust? Are you lying to yourself? If you're so loyal to your country, you're going to join an unjust army to propagate unjust behaviors at the expense of other people's lives because you've just kind of totalized your soul in this notion of grounded humanity. Plus, you're already in a bind financially. So like, well, the military will pay for my schooling and they'll pay off my student debt and they'll teach me a lot of shit. And it's the biggest welfare system that Western humanity has ever known. Framed in brotherhood and camaraderie and common principles, purpose, and type of righteousness, type of defense being the underlying stratum, the sun stratum, non-articulated, not often being able to be articulable of the abuses of being in such things as a military form that goes against like the beginning of the martial arts, such that art of the militant is that of defense, not that of offense as a primary virtue. And yet belonging to a nation such as ours that propagates its world monopoly, hegemony all over the fucking planet becomes, an issue, or should be, I believe, a moral issue to the discerning mind. But then again, you get to these certain levels and then people reapproach their different levels or layers of consideration and which ones they're going to value. Because if you become all high-minded and heavy and then you have to practice and, take the whole fucking laundry to the river and do it, what you had to do before enlightenment and after enlightenment. Then when you're back at that state, aware of this other state, then you've kind of gone through the Protestant born-againness, one's realization relative to their highest understanding of that which is outbound in knowledge is beyond them, and that you've been re-reduced to the pragmatic, the material realm. Not saying that, when one then re-enters, when this surfer lands on shore eventually, if not gobbled up by the ocean, because it's surfing into darkness in this tumultuous wave structure, when it does land on shore, with board or not board, what is, what's, I don't know, I don't want to say the recombinant factors, it more like just the notion of what it's gone through with the deficit of its own memory, meaning one could justify going to war even if they've moralized why not to do it because they've somehow grounded within one level of meta such as to allow them the virtue of being able to sustain a virtue of war. Even the term warlock, you're locking with your interlocutor, you're locking with the horns of the bull, you're in machismo, and you must kill the opponent, and the benign opponent who's only attacking you because it doesn't like the color red and its nuts are bound, or something. I guess it's more bull riding. That's something to that effect. It's like preoccupation with man, with beast, and then looking at other humans as beasts or lesser, and then making certain that humans here are not aware of humans in other countries. Let me get a load of this. Once again, chocolate. Since I only have the one beer, chocolate. Now this is called Tony's Chocolonely. Tony's Chocolonely, which I look as co-lonely or lonely. And then on the back, it's like, look, share our chocolate, share our story. Right now, slaves are working on cocoa farms in West Africa. Many of them are children. Today's Chocolonely exists to change that. Like it's a non-slavery. It's basically implying that there's slavery to make all of our chocolate. And this is a fucking modern company. Look at that barcode. This is a modern company that's saying, hey, look, our virtue here in West Africa is we're supplying you Westerners with your chocolate bars and your candy is to, make certain we're doing it virtuously and not enslaving other humans to bring you your products, which you guys are conveniently via Google or Facebook feeds or the breakup of the internet per country so that you're not exposed to the huge egregious occurrences around the globe. You stay to your local area, keep with the ritual. You don't want to break the patterns of the trends. break the patterns and the trends too much, you'll get a dissonance in society, you'll get a meltdown. The form and structure then will be tested and complicated. And then you got the reemergence, reapproach of certain philosophical takes on things. So people battling other people's ideas. That's the whole game, isn't it? Kind of. Battle of the minds instead of battle of the minds as opposed to battle of the bodies. And where people are willing to put their lives on the line. I'm willing to put my life. This is the hill I want to die on. I realized my case, being somewhat dildo-centric, wasn't the case I wanted to die on. I didn't want to be the guy that sold his soul for a strap-on, as William Burroughs puts it in one of his writings. Even though it seemed as if that's kind of what was occurring. But anyway, so this next year, I should be in a bit of a bind. Let's see who's texting me. If anyone's texting me here. All right, we got oh. Oh. Uh-oh. So one of my viewers is giving me a text right now. I guess I could read, but I have to close down Wizard School shop here for a bit before I get on that. Anyway, I also had to train the old Californian guy to embrace his anxiety in some way and get out of catatonia and nihilism, or at least try to bring him back into a field of what I think would be like normal human behavior of sexuality and socialization and kind of reframing the things that the mind can often complicate. And then the other one is to open the field of consideration relative to knowledges, such that when one is driving, so instead of believing that they are driving flat and vertically across some horizontal plane, or a forward horizontal plane, to instead believe that they are driving up. Even when they're driving forward, just try to conceive that they are in fact driving up. Same thing when you walk. Conceive the idea that in fact the world is rotating under your feet and that you are stationary, and that it'll kind of put you in that holodeck mode of perception, and that opens up a domain of reconsideration of many, many possibilities that then can open up the domain of one's, what I want to say, over X-Man possibilities. The X-Man possibilities. Well, are you part of Slytherin or Huff and Puff, or Dundledorf and Puffin stuffing, or what are you and why are you there? What are you doing there? And then mix genres between X-Men and wizardry powers, and try to. I've ended up having to say to this guy in Thailand, like, ultimately after I'm extracting all these data bits and trying to like mimic how I think Deep Blue or other data collection points are, like pull it all together and then slowly knit it together and then slowly bring it on home, right? Or quickly bring it on home. Either you're the surfer and you're ripping through tides like a bolt lightning, like grease lightning, or you're doing something a little slower, a little more methodical, like writing a treatise on the law and the violations of law structure, throwing wrenches in games. And then you have to think of your relationship to the world and your solo relationship with the Almighty or the oneness and your definition of self. Selfhood relative to a greater whole and greater to different contexts that shift over time and different locales and practices and different habituations and different foods, and that one wants to explore difference often, and other people prefer more of a homebody, stay at home, know one space, maintain a sense of rationalism and tradition that they believe their forefathers and mothers brought or had in order to maintain that which is like family orientation. And I realized that a lot of insight that I have, I think, comes from not having raised a kid, where I necessarily have to maintain an ambivalence internally between my adult swim and the part of me that needs to impart some form of rationalism and proper orientation towards symbol sets, data sets, habit sets, and these other things as one is raising a child into the world. And since I didn't have that, then it allowed for quicker otherly movement and consideration. But then almost at the expense, at some point there was an expense, an ignorance of the parental field relative to children. And that's when I decided I needed to self-censor my art when I was selling it in public. Not like this would be self-censored, but apparently like in the 1920s, to even free the nipple, for a man, a lewdness law, an obscenity law, like men had to wear one-piece suits, right? Men couldn't show their damn nipples in public beaches in certain domains in the U.S., right? And that's within a 150-year period of time. And now we have women walking around with basically their tits out with fucking tape over the nipple with the sign that says "Free our nipple." Like, legally, just fucking free this because, you know, we're a natural organism and we want the freedom of men to do that. And then, of course, the next step of the agenda is to allow full nudity in public, full liberal, like total, like the more liberal a society gets will be also when the society starts breeding less. And then as things move more into an adulthood, then you can get things like more flamboyant reflections of sexuality where people are not in need any longer to protect the eyes of the youth as they're growing, right? And so as humanity decreases in population, it's natural that the women start bonding with other women, and huge lesbian pools will start developing, huge gay pools will start, the homo aspects will increase, the decrease in relationship to the children, orthodoxies decrease, and that is kind of the distinction between being aware of a conservative attribute of those that need to bring up the other or responsible for bringing up the other in some form of consistent thing, so that you don't take somebody who mentally can't handle the data coming in, right? They'll kill themselves if you overload them. They'll just fucking off themselves if they can't figure out how to mitigate themselves away from a heavy data set that is overly overbearing, confusing, and actually has application that runs roughshod against their being, right? They become hostile and defensive, or they take certain postures that they're not quite cued into certain aspects, right? And that's one thing that the rule in wizarding school is one never kills oneself. You always allow yourself to go through the press and the anxiety because there is some yield on some wisdom yield, soul yield, some notion, whether you deny God or not. You could say, oh, the Google gods or my future persona. Robin Williams killed himself. Robin Hoffman, people kill themselves, right? A lot of people kill themselves. So kill other people, kill themselves. And so you get this notion of then theologically they either were indifferent or they thought that the test was over, the hologram test, which is this life, or the powers that be, the hidden powers that be, that one has faith in, that are culminating around them, are somehow just merely a benign set of things that they're only existing while you're existing within the bios. And so you get that whole like internal biological thing, and then you get the story of transcendence and the story of eternal life and the stories of this and that, which I can also fully comprehend an attribution and a credit to, meaning I can see things that way. Anyway, now I'm over rambling, and I'm more radical in my thought. But you see, it's okay for me to be radical in my thinking, because, the word of the day is the tropics, not in tropics. The word of the day is whatever I say, it's the rhyming, the rhythm, the icon, the speed, the wizarding words of wizarding words, the way, the gab, the yada, 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 the blah, blah, blah. No one join. None of y'all join. Oh, see, good to see ya. Those guys are a little back and forth, doing their comment thing. I am an intersection between a few people. A gathering space, if you will, if you must. And anyway, that being said, I'm actually going to have to close it down. Not because I don't want to paint before. Obviously, you guys see that this painting needs more work. Obviously. But I got to close it down because my dogs are barking. My dogs, I mean my feet. Feet are just barking at me. Which cues the bark lord. A bark lord is supposed to cue in Dan and say, oh yeah, the dog's barking. Who let the dogs out? Bark, bark, bark. Who let the dogs out? Who's walking? Oh, not Das Pig. No, he's not out strutting around anymore. The guy's got himself into a bind. Relate. Boy, can I relate. Oh! Not really, but somewhat. Some people can, in their own little way, relate to my little story, and I can relate to their little stories. But hopefully, I'm just going to press through the pain, because whatever I'm experiencing now, although great, is not even close to the pain data set I received years ago. And of course, I don't really much enjoy the masochism. I had to at one point be a masochist because I necessarily had to work through the pain. So I might as well add some fuel to the fire every now and again to increase the comparative relationship between old pain and current pain and possible pain. So one then can inflict some damage or some pain upon themselves just for the sake of a reminder of doing so. Tie it to some sort of discontent in the world if they want, or anything that they want. I mean, humans are vast in how they justify their behaviors, and how it is they settle on their justify their habits and settle on the habits as a type of justification of their person. And so it is funky for me to know that and then try to reanalyze how it is I am justifying my behaviors and how it is I'm deciding what comes next in the future of my life, in terms of how I'm choosing to go ahead now that so much time and energy and blah, blah, blah has gone under the bridge, making me the person that I am, the person that I have become and shall become, and dee. Anyway, all that being said, yada yada, boredom, yada yada, not boredom, yada yada. People saying a lot of yada. There's a lot of people talking about shit and stuff, and that's the other thing. People that they lose themselves in some way, and then they become very political. And they're like a certain personality, a certain phase would be when one finds the nihilism in their self, and they project a political attitude of change, which I think is an actual application. There's an actual practice in politics. But when one is merely speaking and not applying in politics, then it becomes just a kind of a masturbatory exercise. And that was also something else I brought up in my court documents, was like, hey, the judge shut down one of my filings that mentioned my EIN number with my bank, which mentions, it's tied to my political account. And now, because in the preliminary hearing, it's coded, at least in Utah law, and apparently many states, that the state, and I think this is simply to expedite trial, the state's claims, their inferences, are weighted as more reasonable than the defendants, such that they can bring you to trial, and that basically it's a coded impartiality where the court has to weigh base claims of the state and the prosecution in a heavier way than the claims of the defendant. And so, to contrapoint that, I ended up filing that my judge had used, I inferred that she knew that I was running for political office because my banner on Facebook suggests so, and that by her striking my filings and maintaining and not dropping the case, she was in fact being politically irresponsible, which is against at least Utah judicial ethics code. It's an ethics violation for a judge to make a decision based on a person, a defendant's, or any one of the officers in the court's political standing. Like, that's illegal. And so I then use my inference to supplant an inference. A reasonable inference is supplanted as an inference of reason, or I don't quite phrase it that way, but it's basically something like, well, I can easily, like they're doing in my case, infer that the judge, in fact, is doing this based on her rulings, based on what seems as like a non-objectivity to my claims, and kind of like. But then, that was it. Reasonable inference supplants reasonable doubt, or an inference of guilt supplants reasonable doubt. And that our court system in the U.S. is based on reasonable doubt. That's what they're trying to prove. But the preliminary hearing already presumes reasonable doubt, right? In order to bring it to trial, they weigh it that way, right? But then ultimately, they don't really want to bring it to trial. They can, just based on the insistence of the innocent party, which is where I probably, like I said, should have taken the case, and still might if I appeal it. But I just thought it was a cool play. I think the whole thing was really a good exercise. It's still a good exercise. And even this year, even if I don't know, I'm on painkillers and I'm required to walk, and I move through huge suffering, and I don't get to another pain clinic, and I don't get my license back, and there's all this other problematic shit, and this is like a year in hell for me coming up. It's like, oh, this is going to be golden, right? You got to be just happy to live an existence of abject physical misery. And then I'll reshore up my arguments, like anti-natalism, not my neg-entropic arguments, but my neg-anti-natalism arguments. No, life's good. You're supposed to sow. You're supposed to push through it. You're supposed to continue painting this painting and rambling, even though it fucking hurts. Why? You're making progress. There's some virtue in progress. It overshadows the pain. You ignore the pain. You keep dialogue. You keep pain. You keep your focus outward here, and then you don't have to suffer so much, right? Don't suffer so goddamn much, right? Because your mind is out here. And I'm dating Selma, and of course she's a body worker. Talking about your fascia, your skin and your muscles and the layers of this fascia system that's overlaying everything on the muscle system, and how one needs to get into their heart space, and into this, and it's this motion of emotion on the most base heart-centered way of approaching the world, with all of the metaphorific aspects of what the heart is in terms of being compassionate and caring, but more of an actual chakra coming from this section instead of from the neck up. So she says, by displacing your energy out here, you're denying the chakral point in here. You need to bring it through here and down and center, heart-centered consciousness. Well, that's easier said than done, but it was done, and that's part of her magic influence. But that by itself destabilized me, and then to realize how abusive she was to this chakra, because she lives in the sacral chakra to the heart chakra, and above the neck, she's kooky, kook chops, fucking nana. And then I watched how manipulative she was from that mode of thinking, and I thought, lady, I know last time you were in here, you lasted 24 hours, but as soon as I saw the way she was trying to manipulate her ex-husband relative to the law, when I was going through a legal thing, I was like, lady, you're out. You're done. I am not going to be around a black widow that's going to sit on the sidelines of the web and wait for some text from her husband. Like, her son went missing. Her son went missing. And she should have been in a complete panic. And she should have called the dad immediately to figure out what's going on. But no, she texts the dad. Then she calls the police station. The police station, have you talked to the dad? She's like, no, I text the dad. Well, why haven't you called the dad? She says, because I'm waiting for him to text something that implicates him. I want my ex-husband to implicate himself. So, because, she's so fucking embittered that the guy that's raising her kids is a fucking drugged up, nihilistic fuck chop, apparently, and that he's the one that got custody. And I'm like, man, dealing with these women who are from broken families where they lose their kids, and then even some women that aren't that way, that don't have kids, they're just like, is this a technique? Is this the modern technique? And the lady in the court case even, like, oh, this is what's said. She doesn't evidence it, right? But it's just in the claim, right? And so if a woman can get evidence, text evidence, and I just watched as she fished for this at the peril of her son. I'm like, lady, Jesus, really? You say you care for your son, but no, you care more for vengeance on the husband than you do for your son. That's what I was thinking in my head. And then, of course, that, tosses her in some ambivalent state and blah, 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 blah. And then Christy, boy, she called me finally after my career randomly, talking about coincidences in the universe, or when the universe allows shit to show up. It's not going to show up before its time. Wine is only perfect in its time. Anyway, she, after my sentencing, then Christy shows up, and I'm like, lady, your name showed up in Discovery because you once called the cops on me for throwing water in her eyes. I was drinking wine, and she said, it was vodka, and it hurt so bad. I called an ambulance, not the police. Well, then that shows up on my Discovery as part of the weight against her. Oh, this man is abusive against women because this lady called the cops on him saying he threw vodka in her eyes. And even though he didn't treat her, it hurt her very much. And this evidence is that he's got a history of abuse towards women. It's like, Jesus, really? That's how you guys get it? Anyway, I just couldn't stand it. See, this is almost a confessional video also. You guys get to watch this, listen to this, hear this shit. Thank you for turning in, by the way. Obviously, I'm very grateful. And so throw all the money that you have towards my Patreon. Please, everyone, give me all your money. Just give me all your goddamn money now. Give it. Go on. Give it to me. Boom, 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 boom. Oh. Music's before I get through. Anyway, so there's that. And then there's the dealing with the young ones and the boomer meme and the fucking the ageism that's crept through as some sort of like a new allowance. Like, well, we got to break somewhere. We got to be equal through the genders and through the races and through all this. So let's just take it out on the old people. That is still justified because you guys are part of the patriarchy. You're older, you're boomer, you're part of the fucking blah, you boomer, blah. Let's run this shit line down the x-axis unless we're going to talk about slavery, the history of abuses through humanity that are showing up as virtuous now in contemporary minds and contemporary thinkers that only want to define themselves as being a part of a group. It's oppressive. And you get the whole argumentation processes. And then once again, it's like listening to people that I didn't care for their arguments in the past and just kind of absorbing them as just statements, and then applicable statements for my consideration. You guys see what I did there again? I added more orange to my pink. Such a faux pas. None of you stopped me. None of you in the comments section stopped me. Then again, I haven't checked the messages sent to me by one of my faithful viewers. So maybe he was like, oh, by the way, it looked like you were adding too much orange back in there and it should have been pink. Of course, he's not saying that. But I am curious, you know. I got one from Canada, someone's in Ireland. Fyodor Dostoevsky, well, everyone knows he's an old author from Russia. He's a resurrected dead dude. And then we got maybe Asa, maybe Christian, you know, all four of the people that tune into my channel. You guys are all good bastards. Maybe there's some artist out there going, oh, Jesus, who's this fucking philosophy rambling numbnuts that's got some painting? Painting is a fucking habit. Talk about your painting. Talking about this philosophical legal consideration shit. Enough of that. Fucking get done with the getting done already. And then I'm like, hey, you know, my words are broadcast out to the universe, same as yours, and I think that everyone's paying attention, and it's the Truman Show, and that you guys are just really good at ignoring me. Google's really good at keeping my viewer count down in terms of my vision of my world, but really I'm the controller of the planet because I'm the savior of the planet because my name's Michael and I'm an archangel and I came down to help get rid of Satan and saving the planet from all of its tyranny and its negativeness. And yeah, and bo, and ho, ho, and he, Merry Christmas. I'm also Santa Claus because I had a red beard and I'm tall. And I fulfill the definition of Mormon Jesus Christ because I'm 6'4", blonde, Caucasian, and I just need to show up to Independence, Missouri, and all of a sudden the world will know. They'll know that I am, in fact, the second coming of Christ, and that we are all gods, and that I happen to be the God of this particular planet called this particular thing within my particular carcass. And, of course, I don't want to deny your existence, even though I know you just kind of follow the data sets when I'm gone and I'm not looking. You guys are just merely data sets. The world's falling away behind me, and it's only in the quantum. There you are, the quantum flame together right when I looked. How dare I look? It changed the reality, and now you're in flux again. Now I'm turned away, and trust the senses. Trust the phenomenological ground over the epistemological ground. Trust the facts. State what it is. Tell everyone the way the world works, the way it must work. Jesus H. Christ, it must work this way and not that because that's nonsensical. So that's the other fucking thing. Not only can I not use kratom, not use alcohol, maybe I can use kratom, but I can't use weed, can't use alcohol. I can only use any medications that I can get from a doctor, but I can't get into a pain clinic for at least 2 weeks, if not 3, and who knows even how they're going to treat me then. And I got a transporter to that, but the problem was what was I going to say? I got other supplements might mix into that. That's not what I was going to say. What was I going to say? You with the face. What was I going to say? Class, what was I going to say? Come on, one of you telekinesis people, spit it out already. Enough of this holding back. Just remind me of what I was going to say, damn it. We don't have time. Dilly-dally. Ah, shit. You know what it is? I'm mixing an acrylic with my oil. Like on the palette. My lamp. Yeah. Jesus, that's what I get. That's what I get for rambling about shit. Contrary mediums. That being said, I'm done. I'm done, folks. Say your last goodbye. Backstage. Oh, she's the one's in now. Oh, now you want in. Oh, Jesus. I'm going to shut down this fucking thing. Sorry. Now I'll bring you up for like 2 minutes. You can say hi and bye. And then we'll go private or something. Okay, you're on deck. I'm going to cry like a baby while I'm making a coffee. Oh, look at that. You got a goddamn glove on. Look at this. I got a goddamn... I forgot to put my own painting glove on. See, my own regular painting glove. That's what I was missing, besides mixing up the acrylic with the oil. All right. Well, like I said, you best say bye to the crown, being as you're the only one watching. All right. Okay. Bye. Bye. And we'll pick this up soon enough. I'll just start another one, but I'll keep it silent. It'll be a silent dialogue.
Yeah,
yes.
Cut these 2 fingers.
Yes.